Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode, episode 7 of the No Zoo Lions podcast. My name is Ari, joined by Chad in snowy Ottawa, Canada. He's had some great times up there. Apparently, it's snowing outside now. We have a great episode today. So instead of specifically talking about one thing, we've actually taken some questions from listeners and we've kind of amalgamated it and also a couple topics that Chad and I want to talk about. So this is going to be kind of a mishmash, but there is some great content coming your way. Welcome, Chad, from snowy Canada.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really good. We're having a great time training with the parliamentary police brought me up for just almost like a closed course, and then they invited some other people, and it's custom. They just want to work on a few things, and we're just having a great time.
Awesome. So good. Okay, let's get it.
Great room, several black belts, really tough, so really good.
Canadians, of course.
Yeah,
We're
really good.
hardy. Okay, so how do we apply police jujitsu? We talk about it all the time, but to different law enforcement environments, such as corrections, air marshals, that type of thing. It's a little different than being on patrol. And this has come up a few times, especially from actually, I've had a few correctional officers going, "Hey, I love PJJ, I love jujitsu, but I'm one guy, 30 inmates. It's a little different response time." Uh, so let's kind of talk about that. Is there a benefit of learning jujitsu or PJJ in the correctional type of environment?
So yeah, we'll talk about both those two examples separately. In a correctional environment, absolutely, because they're it is different, right? So by virtue of you working there, you are going to be disarmed, other than maybe pepper spray, depending on where you work, maybe a taser, inside the facilities. Once they leave the facilities, for some agencies like transport guys, all that, they're armed just like a police officer. But in the correctional facility, like in a pod setting or whatever you call it, in a unit, the inmates might be the ones who are actually armed, and you
Mhm.
might be relatively unarmed, and the inmates might be the only ones armed with something life-threatening, typically a blunt instrument that they might use, or a stabbing implement that is hand fashioned, but still very deadly. And so there's potential you're going to run into an armed adversary. The other thing about a correctional setting is you're going to run into people who have various life experiences that can be very, very challenging. And there's a certain amount of toughness for some of these guys that you need to be respectful of. You need to be aware that they are capable of doing things that your normal guy in a traffic stop might not do, and they are committed to do such things. In the States, the FBI did a study several years ago. This is pre-COVID, this several years ago, but still during my policing career, probably mid 2000s. And they looked at people who killed law enforcement officers, particularly in the States. And your typical offender who killed officers in the field was had been to prison. They said these things are huge red flags when you're running a guy on a stop for officer safety. It doesn't mean they're still a bad guy. It doesn't mean you're going to make an arrest. It doesn't green light you to use force on this person.
Mhm.
You just need to be aware of who this person is and what they potentially are capable of. Have they been to prison? If they have, they could potentially be different, not jail, but prison, right? In the States. And does their criminal history indicate a wide degree of offenses they've been arrested for, or is it one offense? I'm a prolific car thief. Beyond the morality of stealing other people's cars and whether you should or you shouldn't, and the efficacy of that, the lawlessness of that. If I'm a car thief, that's how I choose to make a living.
Mhm.
And while some people would frown on it, I would say it's a bad idea. That doesn't even if I've been to prison for it or for narcotics dealing, right? That's one thing. I chose to make money a certain way. It doesn't mean I'm not dangerous. I'm still dangerous, but that's the way that guy chooses to make money, or gal. Someone who's been arrested for child abuse, robbery, theft, stealing cars, battery, that person plus prison sentences, the data was that they are far more likely to kill a police officer. Now, certainly there are people who kill police officers on their first contact, but they are rarer. When we do, the percentages were somewhere in the 60s. So that's 6 out of 10 cop killers in the US at this time were people who had been to prison and people who had a rap sheet that was varied. So if I'm running a guy in my car, I've got him stopped in front of me. Once again, I've stopped ex-felons, arrested for various things, and given them a warning. I'm not advocating enforcement action solely based on one's criminal history. But I am advocating that someone who has been to prison, it can be radically different if this started to go south than a guy driving his kids home from soccer practice who's never been arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Now that goes back to our correctional facility. With that in mind, it's more important I'm trained. More important. I've got to be hard to kill. Now, certainly the environment I'm in and the tactics I use could vary greatly from patrol. But the tactics that I would use to not be taken down are similar to the same. Punch defense, similar to the same. Takedowns, similar to the same, using a lot of wall work in a correctional facility, a lot of objects. Using my mind and my communication skills to de-escalate becomes vitally important in a correctional setting. Seeing the cues that things are going to kick off. Guys who work in those settings often will talk about, okay, we could tell something was going to jump off. And you don't know if it's going to jump off towards staff or towards other inmates. Understanding the inmates in your pod, who's mentally unstable, who has a history of violence. All these things are things a correctional officer could use that are soft skills or whatever you want to call it, that they could utilize. But you're not going to get by with just knowledge of how to talk to inmates or how to read the room and how to see when stuff's brewing. If I'm going to put time into all that, why wouldn't I put time into making myself harder to actually finish, harder to knock out, harder to take down, harder to hold down, harder to submit? I would think it would be more important to have training. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. When I think of correctional facilities, and we're going to talk about air marshals too, we're talking about a specific a situation where an officer is caught in a I'm going to say confined space, a predetermined confined space. And on patrol, it can be super varied because it can be out in the open, it can be in an apartment. But when you work in a correctional facility or an airplane, there's certain things you have to do. So movement can be an issue, especially on a plane, but it also movement could be a problem inside of a cell. I think your point of also reading the room, this comes with experience and reading the situation. Unfortunately, it takes time to understand, hey, it's about to kick off. I can feel it. I can see the signs. And I think that's where experienced officers really come in handy to tell their recruits, hey, you got to look for these signs before it goes off. And you hear it all the time, these stories of the tension inside the cell block. And the new guy just doesn't feel it. And then the senior guy is like, it is about to go off, and you can feel it's palpable in the room.
Or he doesn't know what's happening. So here's another point that I would make along those lines. I've been on stops before where it just didn't feel right, and I just called another car and then nothing happened.
Mhm.
But maybe that's because I called another car. And I don't know why it didn't feel right. I've been in stops where it didn't feel right and then they run or then they try to attack us. But I've had ones that didn't happen.
Mhm.
So then why did it not happen? Is the fact that I'm calling for backup, that I'm positioning them well, they see that I see it. Now, one I can relate to where the guy told me for sure he was contemplating attacking me the whole time we were dealing with each other was an old biker who'd been in and out of prison. He had extensive criminal history. He was DUI in a vehicle. He crashed, not a bike, crashed a vehicle, had fled from the vehicle on foot. We found him in the area, tried to deny driving, had obvious injuries, fit the description, was very beard, longer hair, certain age, very unique, not hard to find him. People saw him flee from the car. We catch him in the neighborhood. He tried to blend in once we came on the block. I think he was trying to find a good place to hide.
Mm.
We just picked him out right away. We stop him. We bring him back over. We take him into custody. We can smell the alcohol in his breath. We can see injuries consistent with the car accident. We built enough probable cause that we felt like we could move him from one place to another. So we moved him back to the scene. His ID actually fit the registration of the vehicle.
Okay.
So we bring him back to the truck. He's our driver, right? And his story is not someone else was driving. His story was I wasn't driving. So bad story, wrong story. I get him back over there. We've already got him into cuffs. He says that he'll do field sobriety. We take him out of cuffs. He won't follow directions clearly, and he keeps almost trying to inch close to me, but he's not threatening. But it's wrong. Something's wrong. He won't follow simple directions, but he's not fall down drunk. He won't. It's off. I don't know why it's off. And I keep staying sharp, maintain a distance. He never threatens me, but I'm very formal in what I'm expecting of him. And whenever he would try to close distance, hey, what are you doing? Stop. Stand right there. I would address him with my hands. I would be ready, and I would tell him, but not overreacting. Like, he and I aren't squaring off for a fight, but I'm reacting every time he innocuously doesn't follow directions and keeps trying to get close to me. So finally I ask him, are you going to do this or not? He says, no, I'm not really going to do it. So we recuff him. We get him into cuffs, take him back to holding cells, also where we have the blood alcohol intoxication machine. We start doing our paperwork. I start running him. He has multiple batteries on cops. He's been convicted of battery on a cop, which means he hurt the cop. Those get dropped all the time. This dude's been convicted. So I go back to him and I ask him and I go, hey, what's going on with your background, man? You have a history of fighting with the police and you didn't fight us. He goes, I thought about fighting you multiple times. He goes, now that, you're there, we're talking through the cell, but not through bars, through a cell door. And he goes, I have to give you a compliment. And I said, what's that? And he goes, you just never let me get close enough, because when I do this, I've got to get good shots in on at least one dude.
Yeah.
He goes, you just would never, I'm going to take a beating, so I got to at least have something. And he goes, I'm also going to get more time. So he goes, I kept weighing in my head, I'm just going to catch a misdemeanor here. Do I want the fight thing tacked on? And in my head, I was like, if it's worth it, if I can hurt these guys, I'm going to do it. But you just never, and he was matter of fact. He wasn't mad at me. He said, I hope you don't misunderstand this. Like, I don't dislike you, but I don't like the police, and you're taking me away. You're causing me some heartache. He goes, I ain't cause you a little heartache too. He goes, but it's got to be worth it. And he goes, at the end of he goes, if the charge would have been significant enough, I would have never gone in cuffs. We would have fought in the street. But he goes, I wasn't sure if I'm drunk. And then you guys start putting together, I'm definitely driving. I start putting together, I'm definitely going. He goes, I'm drunker than I thought I was. He's laughing.
Yeah.
And he goes, but yeah, I was going to fight. There was no way I would have not fought you at some point. Now, I wasn't going to do your stupid test. He goes, you're going to run me through court without any of that evidence. He goes, I'm not going to blow in the thing. You're going to have to take me down to the jail and handcuff me to something, take my blood. Like, I'm giving you nothing. Like, I still won't even, he goes, I still won't even admit I was driving. So he goes, I'm giving you 0 for, the DUI you're going to have to earn. So correctional setting, similar. You've got to pay attention to the guys you're around, but this should be on any call.
Yeah.
So a lot of the fight starts before we fight.
Yeah. So the science of space between two individuals is called proxemics, and it's something that cops just need to learn. And you just highlighted that in that story. It's just not letting a guy get close to get that one shot off, because it only takes one. And so that distance management is so important. And we always talk about it when we're training. You've talked about it already in Ottawa, I'm sure. So The distance management for sure.
And he was like, the longer it went on with you, I could see you're not, he goes, I think you could probably run a good DUI, but he goes, you're going to fight. Like you're putting yourself in good positions. He goes, every time I tried to get you to relax,
Mhm.
just get close to you. He goes, I know you're going to fight and it's going to go quick once it starts. And I go, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I go, I can tell you're going to fight. He goes, I would, but I'm a little older than you are. This is
Mhm.
when I was still in Portland. This is like, shoot, 2003.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm a 5-year cop. Uh, and he just made a decision. I'm not saying I'm a tough guy or he was not afraid of me. It's
Mhm.
just for him, it's what am I going to get out of this? I had a partner with me. We had a second car arrive to help with the DUI investigation. We had a third car riding a like the tow. We had
Yeah.
4 cops.
Yeah.
He's just like, this is just not going to go well from the jump street, and I'm just going to catch a beating and a misdemeanor,
Right.
and I won't even have a good story to tell, to tell the boys later. So very interesting. I think at corrections, you do the same thing. The other thing you do is make sure you understand the protocols to get yourself help in a pod. Like you can't be lax on where do I go when it breaks out? What's the safest place in the area? Is there a place I can hard point and fight while help is coming? Is there one part of the room that I'm really vulnerable to being swarmed? Whereas another part of the room, I can keep my threats downrange, for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
Uh, those kind of things. How do I daily interact with my clientele? Am I an idiot every day? Um, am I trying to be the punishment bureau of the justice system for these guys on their day-to-day living? I don't mind you being super firm and fair. I don't mind you reinforcing rules if you're in a correctional setting. But are you reinforcing rules or are you trying to take advantage of the fact that you're the guard and they're not? And those kind of things can end really poorly. I find guys that train, and this is a very general statement that is wrong at times.
Okay.
This is a general statement. Guys who train generally don't try to dominate somebody through bully tactics. That is a general truth.
Mhm.
Could there be exceptions to that rule? For sure. But dudes who train for a long, long time, I don't know any. Like there's no one I can point to and go, okay, that guy's a black belt. He's earned a black belt in jujitsu. Now they exist, but I'm just saying, first off, black belts are rare. Secondly, um, the kind that are going to use tactics that are going to make them an active target for the whole tier, it's typically not those guys. So it's another
So
thing to think about.
so kind of in summary about the correctional environment, and I'm going to apply this to the air marshal, is know the environment you're working in and run that through your mind. We talk about visualization, super important. So I think running those plays in your mind constantly and knowing all those hard points and things like that, super important. You also mentioned learning takedown defense, really important as well, right? Obviously, even for patrol, I get it. But I think the response time inside prison is faster than we will get on patrol sometimes. So they have an advantage there, but they're outnumbered. So it's way differently. So, and the other thing you pointed out was understanding the improvised weapon stuff, the hands. So I think those are two big ones.
So, and then training for improvised and edge weapons and good survival fundamental principles are super important if you're going to be in that correctional setting or even in a air marshal setting on an airplane. You're generally not going to get firearms in either of those settings.
Right.
The attack's going to come from numbers, a sneak attack, an ambush, empty hand attack, or improvised weapons. Rarely are you going to run into a gun on the inside. On transport or medical calls or court transfer, you could run into firearms in those settings. But typically it's going to be all empty hand, and learn to wrestle, learn to counter wrestle, and then mix in edge weapons. You can do that through us. You can do that through ShivWorks. You could do that through Aaron Genetti and Eli Knight.
Yeah.
Their collective is very, very good with the edge weapon stuff.
Yeah.
Um, all those are really good resources. Um, Rogue Methods teaches a lot of handgun, but
Hmm.
also some edge weapon stuff. All those different places are good places. And really, if you just wrestle and do jujitsu and start to introduce training knives into the environment and explore, you're going to find some really interesting takeaways.
So let me throw this at you, Chad. So when a cop is beginning training in PJJ, they're learning the fundamentals and stuff. And then as a student, they look at you and go, "Hey, coach, I want to learn edge weapons. I want to learn how to control someone who's in an airplane seat. I want to control like these very specific things." And I find that sometimes they want to jump to the specifics before they have that foundation. We do cover things like that, but it takes time. There's so much. So where do you take someone who's overwhelmed initially and being like, can this be applied to everything? Like the concepts, right? So it
Yeah. So,
no.
yeah. Yeah. Uh, so basics and fundamentals are two different things. Basics are, do you even understand the positions or the terminology? Those are basics. Fundamentals to me are what's required in the fight. How do I take the basics and make them functional in an actual fight? That's when you're fundamentally sound. So when you hear us talk about fundamentals, principles, concepts, what we're talking about is taking the basic terminology, basic positioning, basic technique, and we're making those fundamentally functional in an actual fight with a resistive opponent. Get good at fundamentals and basics. A lot of people say basics win fights. I actually disagree, but it's a little bit, I admit, of a word game.
Yeah.
I say fundamentals and principles win fights. And to me, there is a difference. So for that new guy, I would say, hey, let's get good at this stuff that you're probably going to encounter, and then we'll start working on. Once you get good at those fundamentals, guess what? We're just going to go apply it to
Yeah.
a chair. Now we're going to go apply it to he's in a cell.
Mhm.
So strategically and tactics, do they change? Sure. The way we tactically deploy that fundamental skill set changes based on the environment. Where cops can draw these parallels is the fundamentals of marksmanship. So the fundamentals of marksmanship, most people are going to agree it's some kind of sight management, trigger management, some kind of grip, some kind of stance, breathing. Those are the fundamentals of marksmanship. Certainly there's variances to each one, and some people might have one or two more, but typically what we're going to hear are sight management, which means alignment, managing your front sight in between your rear sights, all that. That's sight management, right? Lining up that shot. Stance, two-handed, isosceles. What kind of stance are we using, right? One-handed shooting, two-handed shooting, shooting on the move. Grip, one-handed grip, two-handed grip, strong grip, offhand, whatever it is. Breathing. Well, here's what's funny about a gunfight. I can manipulate those fundamentals based on the fight I'm in. So I'm from here to you. I'm extending my hands. My hands are a foot and a half from the screen. I don't need trigger management here, and I don't need sight management.
Right.
I don't need to breathe well. I could hammer that. I could slam that trigger like I'm having a spasm
Yeah.
and for relevant hits, because relative to you and I, we're on a screen, but you are arm's length from me right now from where I sit. You're facing the screen.
Right.
I don't need to manage my sights. So sight alignment's a thing until it's not a thing. But now we're in the hallway outside and you're 20 feet away from me and I have a handgun.
Hmm.
Now my breathing becomes important. Now those fundamentals, what's required for the fight I'm in? So the basics are sight management, trigger management, grip, all that. The fundamentals are, what of those do I need to deploy in this fight and how? So for me to go into variances like a seat on an airplane, show me you understand fundamental 2-on-1 control just by itself. show me you can wrist weave, take all those out. And then once we're in that specific environment, it is important to train those things once you show me a skill set. So
Agreed.
build.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So hopefully that kind of answers a few quandaries by some correctional officers, air marshals, and things like that. I don't think
The
there's
one other, the one other thing on air marshals that's different
yeah,
is that patrol and in corrections, we can disengage to a degree. I mean, even in corrections, they can assault the pod and get their officers out and then close the pod again.
yeah,
The air marshal's in the air. Like, you need to work on not only being hard to kill, but you need to work your subject control to a super high level. I don't give a crap about your submissions or your ankle lock game or your heel hook game. How are you on knee on top? How can you maintain mount? How can you maintain side control top? How can you maintain positions that are top? If you're working in like an air marshal setting,
hmm
you gotta work to get on top and stay on top for whole rounds and don't submit them at all.
yeah,
Just you're not getting reversed, you're not getting put back in guard. My whole goal is to get on top, dominate, and stay there,
yeah.
and pressure the crap out of my partner.
And you
So
have to, and you have to be clear that this might not happen in the aisle. It could happen in the seat. So you might be on top of
yes,
in a seat, right? So
yes.
yeah,
So subject management and control, and then fight ending stuff.
yeah,
Like how do I finish here? Is also I would want to train a lot in that setting.
yeah,
Even with a firearm in that setting, if I have the firearm, I've got to be aware of where every round goes. If it goes through a window and we lose pressure,
yeah,
aircraft, that could produce a massive issue. Now,
right.
I'm not read in well enough to actually speak super intelligently about that, other than I know they don't like holes in the airplane or the airplane's up flying. If I put multiple holes in the airplane shooting at this guy, I would imagine
hmm
we're going to have a problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Now, I don't know that it would be catastrophic if they're bullet holes. I
hmm
know in the movies, the whole window blows out and then people start getting sucked out the window.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would happen. I don't know that it wouldn't, but I do know it'd be a problem.
yeah.
So even though I have the gun, can I work close quarter acquisition and rounds directly into a target? That would be another skill set I would work very hard if I were an
Yeah.
airman. Retention of your gun becomes vital on that aircraft.
Yeah.
He probably does not have a gun. He probably needs yours. So retention to be huge, subject management and control be huge. And can I access the weapon system mid-fight? Those would all be things. An edge weapon would be massive. They're going to have some kind of pen, a flashlight. They're going to have something that they can strike you with
Yeah.
or stab you with.
Yeah.
So, or they're just going to be crazy and out of control. And
Yep.
that's where your subject management comes in.
Yeah. Work your clinch game. Make sure it's strong. Good grips.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. This comes from one of our listeners, and it says, in the state that I currently work in, there's a mandatory annual training requirement of 40 hours a year, which must include focus on arrest and control and de-escalation training. However, there's no outline of how much is needed, and the department has decided that this requirement is satisfied with 1 hour online course annually, and then the 39 hours of training is whatever the officer wants to train. So no actual defensive tactics is required by the state. How does this officer get his city admin to see the flaw in this so they can enact something like C4C or other programs?
Well, first off, seems legit. 1 hour of computer training online and no more. Oh yeah, what's the problem? No, host of issues there, right? So if I understand it and I frame it correctly, they are getting an hour, but it's an admin type combatives course. It's probably some kind of PowerPoint or something,
Yeah.
some kind of use of force update, maybe even pictures of guys doing stuff.
Yeah.
And then the officers do get 39 more hours of training, but they can literally select. So I could select investigation classes and it would qualify. Is that how you're reading the guy's question?
That's how I'm reading it. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So the officer gets to select. So a few problems here. Number one is, let's say the goal is forward thinking and we really want our officers to be able to select the training because they'll be more into it. They selected it, they'll own it more. Maybe there's some of that thought process or methodology going on.
Mm.
We need to make sure at least there's an option of viable, legitimate, combative type training that is similar to PJJ, operates on similar ground rules of being a mixed approach to where people become hard to knock out or knock down, hard to take down, hard to hold down. They can execute takedowns, team tactics. They can also have a high degree of subject control. And then we introduce weapon systems into that mix and team tactics. So that's a program. PJJ obviously does that. There are others out there that do a very similar thing and are reputable as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if for those 39 hours where I have discretion as a patrol officer or a police officer with the agency, I need to at least have, let's say I want 39 hours then of PJJ. Well, that's got to be in the menu. We've got to have a good mixed approach that allows them to build skill sets that they could use on calls.
Mm.
So even if you're going to say we're going to let them choose, what are we letting them choose from? Is it more online classes? That's not effective. We've got to have mixed in physical, hands-on, skill building DTs. And DTs that also begin to incorporate other parts of the job like firearms, stuff like that. So we've got to have those options available. So that's what I would say first. Secondly, I think it's a bad idea to let me choose just what I want to do. Even I can't earn a college degree by me just choosing my classes.
Right.
Even in the academic world, why do they make me take general required classes? Because even as I work towards whatever my degree is, the field of my study, the institution providing me that academic training, for lack of a better word, wants me to be well-rounded, and they will begin to dictate to me, well, you don't get a pick. Here's 1 hour of dictated topic, and now you have 39 hours of CIT or whatever it is that floats your fancy.
Mm-hmm.
They make me do so many hours in different disciplines. So even if you had the 39 and you left discretion up to me, I think there should be a minimum amount of hands-on physical, and 39 is not enough in a year. So all of it should be that. But since they're going to give them options, you should make a minimum.
Okay.
Such as we're going to give you this 1 hour classroom DTs, for lack of a better word, which still could be valuable if you're teaching principles, concepts, you're teaching those kind of things, fundamentals. That could still be valuable. But I would say that has to be reinforced with like 10 hours of hands-on or something. It's got to be a significant amount of those DTs and at least a quarter of them or remaining hours. With how much we put our hands on people. Here's the other thing at many agencies. They'll do this general thing, but when someone goes to a unit, they're going to receive more training in that field. What I mean is I'm in patrol. Let's say you got a patrol guy who's got a choice of 39 hours to choose from, and he wants to be a detective one day. He just keeps taking detective classes or investigative classes. Those are important, but they're not primarily what he's doing. He's primarily doing stops, putting his hands on people, and ultimately handcuffing people or not. Like every single stop I run on, I'm making decisions on whether they're coming into custody or not based on what's happening on that call. If it's a call service, right? Trying to solve a problem. Custody may not be the answer to the problem. So I'm not saying every call I run on, I'm probably going to arrest someone. The opposite is true. I'm probably not on a lot of my calls. But if I'm in a patrol setting, I'm going to make arrests weekly, probably for something, even if it's a detainment in handcuffs and in the car while you write them a summons or something, then you release them. You might still take custody of them based on the situation. So a good segment, at least a quarter of that time, and I would like to see half of that time designated as hands-on skill building, actual stuff you're going to do if you have to arrest them. So I would say half that time. The third point I would make on this kind of thing that is I've changed my thinking over the years. For years, I've coached jujitsu privately. And we'll have the teaching and the training and the move of the day or the principle of the day, the position of the day. When you come to class, you're going to get a warm up, then you're going to get the meat of whatever it is we're training that day as a team. Then you're going to get broken into at the end. And if your gym doesn't do this as a red flag, you should get broken into rounds every day where you're rolling and or sparring. These can be controlled, but they're with resistance with uncooperative teammates. So that practice has those components every time. Warm up, something we're working on or trying to get better at. We're actually rolling and competing with each other. That's every day in practice. The way I used to do that as a coach is we would warm up. I would train them in something. I would say, okay, everybody roll, and everyone would get on their knees facing each other and roll and not go to the positions we just trained. Like if I didn't tell them to, and they were unfamiliar with what we worked on that day, they're not going to do it.
Right.
That happened for several years while I coached, unfortunately, because I just didn't think of a better way. I started watching how other people would make them start in the position of the day and work towards whatever we'd worked on that day. And they might even do the first round where they say, you only work for what we did today. And then the next round, we still start in that position, but it's free. And then the round after that, it's just a free round, right? That's what I've evolved to, where I'm saying, okay, well, now we're doing the move of the day. We're really focused on that with some resistance. Okay, now next round, we're starting in the position of the day, but now you can go wherever you want. And then the rounds after that would be whatever they want. But then John Danaher talked to me and he was like, are you having people do positional training? And I said, yes, very proudly. And told him, I've even graduated to where I teach. This was my current evolution as a coach. Warm up, show the position or fundamentals of the day. And then every round we were starting, you just had to rotate whether you started in the position on top or bottom, but you had to be in the position throughout all the rolls that day, at least to start, right? I would still do rounds where I'd say, okay, well, we can only do the move of the day all round. Then I would graduate to, okay, we're in the positions, then, okay, switch the other guy down. So I'm making them do the position of the day through the whole practice. And I'm super proud of myself because I'm telling him this. He says, oh, that's partially right. That you're better than a lot. I can feel the disappointment. Not really. I mean, he's not being mean to me, but I know I mess this up. And he says, my guys don't get to choose. And they wrestle from jujitsu positions that are common every day, top and bottom, every person. If we do a move of the day, he says, I don't know if, well, he reinforced this. He said, it's okay for that first round to be about what you did that day. But he goes, if you make the whole training session about that, when do you get back to that position or that submission? 2 years from now? So now they don't get to do side control bottom with an arm trap for 2 years, but they got an hour and a half of it. Can they really retain that? And I'm like, no, they cannot. And he's like, I go, but I think I'm going to save myself again. We have a monthly focus. Oh, that's better than most. That's his way of saying you're not doing it right. Well, that's better than a lot of guys. I'm really proud of you.
Yeah.
When do you get back to that? Next year? Your guys are good from that position? I'm like, well, no, a lot of them still struggle. He says, we train something or train with a goal or an outcome in mind. First round, we might still be doing that. He says, next round, I will say one guy mounted, one guy bottom. Next round, one guy on the back with hooks and a backpack, the other person. Next round, he goes, I dictate to all of my athletes where rounds start. And they have to start one guy standing, one guy in open guard on the ground. Every practice, we do these rounds.
Yeah.
So my guys are familiar with every position.
Mm-hmm.
So do we try to, he goes, and here's the brilliance of what he's doing. He goes, I reverse engineer. How do you apply what we did today to this position now, to this position now, to this position now? How do these fundamentals fit when he has your back, when he's mounted, when you're side control bottom? So his guys train in common jujitsu positions every session. And they get told who's on top and who's on bottom. So guys can't pick.
Yeah.
And they see them rotate. And so he says, that's why my guys are good everywhere. Because they literally train everywhere. You cannot hide from a spot with our team.
Yeah.
Job. But I think if you're doing a 1 hour mandated and 39 hours of Chad gets to choose, I think it's really hard to find guys who will truly challenge themselves. And so I think it's a flawed way to approach the problem.
So it must be a laziness on the state and the admins just to be like, oh, you go choose. They need to have a menu and allow the officer to choose from that menu, but they're not doing it. I think that's how I'm reading this a little bit.
They're not doing it. And here's where it might even be that they think it's because they think if the officer chooses, they'll be more invested and they'll get more out of it. Let me give them the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
The best reason they could do this is a cop will have more buy-in. You're still allowing that, you're still trusting that that officer will train everything we need to train with his 39 hours or hers, and that they will train things they're not good at and inspire growth. And that I don't do that. And I want to do that. I will take easy ways sometimes, and I try not to.
Mm-hmm.
I will try to not, I look at that guy and I don't want to be under him. Yeah. So I'll avoid him in the room, or I'll only go to him when I get to be top. My suggestion to them is, even if you have the best intentions, and you might, it's like me saying to my children, these are our family values. These are what they consist of, but I'm going to allow you to choose what you want to do or not do. I'm going to allow you to choose. You know, I've told you, you can't just sit on YouTube for 39 hours, but it's your choice. Some of my kids would not sit on YouTube because I told them not to. And they would actually say, well, what should we do, Father? Well, these are good things to do. And they would go do it. Some of my other kids would sit on YouTube for 39 hours. And to be fair to my kids, some of them get that from me. I tend to want to do things I want to do. I don't want to throw my kids under the bus on this podcast.
Right.
They're wonderful children.
Mm-hmm.
But they need to be directed sometimes for growth. Now, I can still give them leeway, but I can say, this is the direction you need to go. I think to just leave it up to officers, I think you're going to get a very non-well-rounded, potentially. Let's say the best case scenario is everyone actually does what they should do. They have a varied class selection and they strive for growth every year and they really push the envelope. Okay, that's if it went great. Well, let's say it doesn't go great.
Mm-hmm.
And I just take 39 hours of online fill in the blank classes and I just check a box and I walk away from training. So I think there should be more direction. You should have a minimum number of hands-on hours, and it should probably equal half of your training time. If you're going to give them 39 hours, 20 of that ought to be hands-on. If you think that's too much, then give more time as an agency. What are your thoughts?
So I think the admins whoever made this rule are uneducated when it comes to what you and I are trying to push and other people in our profession, because that it's simply, you don't know what you don't know. And I think I agree with you. It sounds good. It's like more buy-in for them, but you're right. They need some guidance. And I would say to the officer that put this question towards us, I would say, if you really want them to look at some numbers, and I keep saying this, there are literally studies that we have that now show that properly trained people do better. So I would direct them towards that so they have something tangible. And then I would say, hopefully, you get into a position that you're an admin. You don't forget that you were a cop and you were still a cop, and you still have that mindset, but you're able to
So
set this in motion. That's really what it is.
so important. And the last thing I would make, because I have these conversations all the time. Some people will say, well, Chad, you're just a jujitsu guy and you're just in love with MMA and jujitsu. You're a UFC guy. And I'll say fair enough. Like I could understand how that's your perspective. You tell me what I need to do on a call where I have probable cause to make an arrest in the States. What do you guys call it in Canada?
Reasonable grounds.
Okay, reasonable grounds, probable cause, same thing. And now the person is trying to obstruct my ability to put them in position and put handcuffs on them. What should I use to accomplish the goal? Oh, well, you're going to use verbal commands. Okay, it failed. You're going to use de-escalation. Okay, they're not de-escalating. Now what do I use? I agree that those measures will work in the majority of cases. Now they're not working. Now what do I do? Well, at some point they have to admit we're going to grapple and we're going to put our hands on people. At some point they have to admit it. And so I have to train for that. And that's far more common than some crazy shootout. Most cops are not going to, how many shootings do you have in your jurisdiction annually from law enforcement, OISs?
Where I am, it does not happen often. You maybe
Under 10 a year?
maybe one.
Okay.
Yeah,
How many people are going to get in a struggle to handcuff someone in your jurisdiction?
a lot.
Yeah, everyone probably throughout their career, right? Everyone at some point is going to have someone tense up, pull away, push the hand off, try to turn and walk away. Everyone. So it's just, that's another thing for him to bring to his admin. It's nice to have 39 hours of varied choices, but we have to be realistic.
Yeah.
Have you ever had, here's the other thing we have to be realistic about as an admin and as a group, an industry. Have you ever seen an injury on someone where they didn't resist at all and they just complied?
Have I
Is
seen
it
it?
common to see an injury?
No, not like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Where they follow commands.
Yes.
Okay. So that's not high risk. Have you ever seen, there are lawsuits that come from why you even stopped me or you detained me in the States. There are
Yeah.
people who will challenge whether the detention is lawful
Right.
and whether the arrest was lawful, but they did not physically fight.
Mhm.
So those people are there. That is what it is. Absent those people, I've never had a lawsuit for just a normal handcuffing or just a normal. Now, cuffs were too tight. You didn't double lock them. Cuffs got left on for 12 hours. Okay, that's different. But
Right.
just handcuffing someone, like that's not common.
No.
What is common is lawsuits for cops when they get into scenarios that rapidly escalate. The officer doesn't have a deep skill set. The event begins to take a turn, and the officer does the best they can with the training you gave them.
Yes.
If you allowed him to pick 39 hours of whatever he wants and it wasn't DTs, you can't be upset at the back end when he's not proficient or she's not proficient as an admin. If you just say, pick what you want, you gave them permission to not be proficient. That is a training failure on the agency.
Yeah.
You can say, well, we want them to pick more well-rounded. Well, it doesn't matter what you want. You gave them the opportunity to choose. It is on you as an administrator, 1000%. If you have cops who can't physically, proficiently, effectively handle a human being, that is on you. That is not on the line officer. You gave him a choice and he opted out or she opted out. They should not be able to opt out. It ought to be mandatory.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I think that's another approach.
Yeah, and I've seen officers sue their admins and their administration for not providing enough. So they're being sued, and then they go back and they sue the department, going, "Listen, we don't get any training, so you got to cover your butt."
Yeah.
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 Okay, great. So here's the last one we're going to tackle, and this one's good. So, Chad, I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to be a little sarcastic about this, but this is the question. Jiu-jitsu and the stuff that you're training doesn't address multiple opponents. So jiu-jitsu kind of actually sucks. So you should probably choose another martial art to address the multiple opponent problem in jiu-jitsu. Let's
Yeah.
talk about multiple opponents in jiu-jitsu and police jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Yeah. So, now your answers to multiple opponents, they're partially correct. That's why we prefer police jujitsu, which is a mixed approach. Their answer to is partially correct. But if I get taken down, so let's start first with, and this also goes back to what we talked about earlier with someone who wants to learn how to get someone out of the chair and all these very niche things versus just fundamentally be sound.
Mhm.
So I will, whenever someone comes at me with multiple opponents, the first thing I will say back is, are you proficient enough right now to deal with one guy punching you, take that guy down while he's trying to hit or punch you, control them on the ground and work them into handcuffs while they're resisting? If the answer to that is no, I can't do it with one person, I don't want to hear about your multiple person problem. You
Yes.
can't do it with a single person.
Right.
So before we jump into these fantasy lands of I'm going to fight 17 dudes or 5 ninjas, even a realistic, I'm going to fight a drunk guy and 2 of his friends are going to jump in. Okay.
Mhm.
That's a real threat. That could happen 100%. I'm going to fight this guy and his wife. I'm arresting him for DV, and now his wife is literally trying to attack us.
Yeah.
1000% happens. I'm with you 100% with that example. Generally, when I hear multiple opponents, though, it's some extreme nonsense and how my art. So, can you deal with one guy effectively? If the answer is no, then we need to start there. This would be analogous
Mhm.
to you teaching me addition, subtraction, and multiplication because I don't know math. And I say, Ari, don't teach me that. What about quantum physics? This subtraction is not going to work when we do quantum. So that means it doesn't work.
Mhm.
It's absolute nonsense. I need a foundation. I need a base. Once I become proficient within that base, we can begin to add layers and add problems. We can go from geometry to trig to qualitative mathematics, whatever it is. I got to learn to add, subtract, multiply. Now we can start to work in statistics. Once I start understanding mathematical equations, the same thing applies here. So give me a skill set that's solid, rock solid, with you versus one guy or gal. Now let's go to the multiple opponent problem though. Let's say I've developed a really good skill set on not getting held down. If 2 or 3 guys bum rush me and just the effect of I'm fighting these 3 bodies, suddenly I get overwhelmed and I get pulled to the ground.
Yeah.
My ability to get up versus 1, 3, 2, 4, 5, my ability to fight my way to my feet is earned in one-on-one skill building sessions repeated over time versus tough dudes.
Yes.
That's how I find my way to the feet. There's not a magical path because now I have 3 opponents. I have a magical way to fight them. There's no magical way. Now,
Mhm.
there are tactics, and even in PJJ, departments have requested custom training to deal with the multiple opponent problem. And I would admit that in law enforcement, that's a real risk. That's why we change our jujitsu. So for our jujitsu guys out there who are really good at dealing with one guy, you need to remind yourself when I'm in an environment outside, when I'm in an unknown environment with an unknown amount of combatants, unknown skill sets, unknown if they're armed or not, unknown if others are going to join the fight. I can't get into my grappler's ball. I don't want to play bottom guard. I don't want to get just focused on this one person. I want to get into positions. I don't want back with hooks, with a deep seatbelt, both hooks in, belly down. I'm flattening them out. It's phenomenal for that one-on-one fight. So where that does become appropriate is even as I develop my skill set to handle things one-on-one, to defeat things one-on-one, I'm also developing tactics that are very specific to the environment I'm going to be in.
Right.
My jujitsu evolves, not different jujitsu, but different emphasis, different positional emphasis than gi, IBJJF. What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I like how you talk about one of the benefits of jujitsu is understanding how to actually get up. And I don't think that's addressed enough because the layman looks at it and go, oh, it's just you grappling on the ground. It's like, actually, no, it's me getting out of bad positions. And bad positions means being on the ground and getting up. So there is a massive benefit of learning that jujitsu grappling style. Now, if you look at stand-up martial artists that get taken down and they try to get back up, typically it's not with technique. It's them just trying to push up, bench press, and get up. And they can't get up, especially against a grappler. So that's where the benefit of understanding grappling and jiu-jitsu really helps to get out of bad spots and popping back up.
100%. And if I don't train grappling, if I don't become proficient in grappling and I make an arrest and it's a polyester pile,
Yeah.
even if it's 2-on-1 and my partner and I are laying on the guy and just holding on to whatever we can hold on to, we're not getting to dominant positions that are trained with dominant goals or outcomes we're working for, specific rather, not dominant. I'm going to be more susceptible to a sneak attack, someone run up and pump me in the head because I'm not effective on the ground. When I'm effective on the ground, I can work towards a trained outcome while still being aware of my surroundings because I'm not being overwhelmed by the fight and I'm working for very specific goals. When I'm on top position and I've taken someone down, we modify our control and righting positions to account for the suspect's health and safety. We modify them for that reason, or at least the perception of his health and safety. Doesn't matter. We still modify them, and we modify them to be in an open environment where we very well can encounter multiple opponents. So we don't get in our grappler's ball where we're down there tucked tight. I've got head and arm control. My head's on his chest. I'm chest to chest. My knees are drawn up tight. I have no idea what's going on around me.
Yeah.
We change and adapt our jujitsu. Now, are we doing a cell extraction with a team and everyone else is locked down and we're literally in a module? There are no other people. Everyone else is a cop. Well, now I can use some other jujitsu on this guy.
Yeah.
No problem, and wear him out. But in a parking lot, to say, oh, I'll just wear him out from top position. That guy might be a secondary threat in that
Yeah.
parking. You need to have your head up and be aware of what's going on around you. So jiu-jitsu changes to account for multiple opponents, even in our system.
Yeah.
We account for the fact that there could be a lot of different adversaries. Once we break into multiple opponent stuff, we do have some principles and concepts that we can train very specifically, but they fall back to our version of police jiu-jitsu fundamentals and Invictus fundamentals, which are, can I be more mobile? Am I controlling distance? Am I creating angles? Am I transitioning? All those things are things we teach and have taught for years through both the Invictus movement and the PJJ movement.
Yeah.
All those things put me in position in a one-on-one fight to deal with a second or third adversary. Whereas an untrained approach where I just grab the guy
Yeah.
and it's not effective. Now I'm overwhelmed by the one guy I'm fighting. The other guy joins in. By the way, I'll say this too. If you become really good at one-on-one control and you become dominant or you dominate dudes, that is a de-escalator for everyone else who might want to jump in that fight.
Yeah.
So this just occurred to me, but I can specifically remember in gangs when we go out on 6 gangsters, and it's me and my partner, we're in a 2-man car, and a guy begins to fight with us. I sweep his feet, get top, and I dominate him. And I'm literally looking at the other guys, and I'm pointing at them. You're next. You want to come over here? And they're like, yeah, no. And they're like, it's BS, get off him, but they're not closing anymore. because what we're doing is effective and we're cuffing that guy. Now we're done with him. We're like, we'll get you next if you want to join the party. No, no, I'm good. But it's BS. You're taking little John away. Well, you're going to do nothing about it because we were effective in that one-on-one encounter and they watched effective force being delivered at a high degree. And it makes that second guy think.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the reasons you get pile-ons is because the cop stinks at grappling.
Yeah.
He's afraid of multiple opponents. He gets into a grappling scenario and the other guys go, oh, I can jump in here. There's no threat from this cop. I've got a chance to crack him. Well, with guys like you and I, like you're going to come into a fight. That's what's going to happen because I'm not being overwhelmed by my one-on-one encounter with this dude.
Yeah.
I'll just handle him and I'll handle you right after. Then I'll handle your buddy. By the way, that's analogous to what? I do multiple rounds in a row in
Right.
class. I'm used to going 6 rounds in a row. You're not used to going 1 round. You don't train, Mr. Bad Guy. And I'm used to fighting one dude and controlling him and submitting him and then fighting another dude and doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'll do it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it absolutely helps with multiple opponents, multiple ways.
There is a term. So this comes from my longest running training partner. His name is Dan. Dan and I have been training for 21 years together. And he has a term which I'm going to throw out to you. So you talked about balling up and not being aware of your surroundings. So the term that cops need to be aware of in jiu-jitsu is what Dan calls it, and now I've adopted it, is called trappling. You get trapped in your grappling mindset. I thought it was a genius way of
Yes.
I'll tell you. So when you trapple with someone, you don't know what's going on around you, or you get so focused on BJJ that you lose sight of what's going on. So do not get caught in that trappling mindset because it can be deadly.
So that's the real threat is that would be the real threat. Acquiring a skill set that makes you dominant to another human is not the real threat. You
Yeah.
know, I don't care how many people you throw at me in a room.
Yeah.
Uh, the fact that I can't fight any of them would be bad for me.
Yeah.
The fact I can begin to dominate them and not get trappling, that's one of the greatest things ever. So really good point.
Yeah.
Last thing is, if you truly fight 5 guys, you're going to get your butt kicked. You're
Yeah.
going to take some lumps. But if I'm used to that, once again, from training consistently over time in a PJJ type manner, where this isn't the first time I've had a bad round,
Yeah.
that's also my benefit. And listen, they're everyone who fights multiple guys that really are committed, they're coming. Like there's 5 dudes and we're going to fight.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to take their lumps.
And
The
we have
fact
to,
that
but we have,
doesn't matter.
yeah, but we have to be really clear here for listeners, and we're saying that obviously, if you're put in a situation where it's 5-on-1, this is a game changer for grievous bodily harm or death, and firearm nickname,
100%.
right? So we're not saying you fight the 5 guys and take your lumps. It's not.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. That suggestion is just from the people who act like they have something that's going to work against 5 guys.
Right.
Like, no, you don't. No, you don't. First off, you can't fight one guy. Almost universally, those guys who are really hung up on that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, let's just you and I fight. See how that goes.
Yeah.
Well, you're trained in jiu-jitsu and boxing. I don't want to fight you. What are you talking about? And you want to talk to me about how I don't, so anyway.
Okay.
Great question. Common thing that I've seen thrown around. Those are some ways to approach it and some ways to think about it, guys.
So the last thing I want to touch upon, just our little 2-minute blurb here. Jimmy sent a question in for both of us, and he asked this actually specifically you probably. He said, "Hey Chad, what are some techniques on reading a room when you're coaching, and keep the class evolving, especially when you're trying to accommodate questions like, 'Hey coach, how do I deal with a stronger, bigger, a heavier opponent performing a technique? It's not working over here. How do you address that? What's your typical response when you get that in a room?'"
So the typical response is to reinforce our fundamentals one of which is our fundamental principles that override our whole program. One of them is transition. Well, first off, it might not work.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
Right.
And you should learn something about yourself and about how big a bite you can bite off.
Yeah.
And you should understand that about yourself. And that can improve over time.
Mm.
And that can also depend on the other big person on off our initial lockup. I feel some trained behavior. They're strong. They're doing the right things. Weight classes matter. That's why we weigh dudes in and women in who fight other humans for a living. There's no sanctioned non-weight class fights. Like that's one of the reasons they do that is size, strength, athleticism can affect your effectiveness. If done right, no can defend is not a thing. Or I would just do that thing right and then no one would ever defend it.
Yes.
So there are different things that play into that. So one thing I tell them is everything won't work. The other thing is, have you ever had someone who's ridiculously resistant to a technique?
Mhm.
Like you can't armbar this person or you can't easily take them down and you can take everyone else in the room down from this spot, but they have great hips. Like I also tell them some people are just really resistant to a particular technique. That's why we're not too technique dependent.
Yes.
And I might need to transition to something else. So transitioning is a key thing I teach them there. Everything might not work and everything is not equal. Like if you learn to do this, they can't defend it is nonsense. In fact, if someone says to you, this will never fail, no one will get hurt, this will work, you should automatically not train with those people. That should be the end of it.
Yeah.
That ought to be the red flag that says, I can't train with them. Because either they're not being honest or they don't know them. Both are bad. Both are wrong. So that's a great question. So number one is it might not work.
Yeah.
And that might be due to several factors. So we hone in on our other, we want to stay mobile. We want to try to move to an angle off of that. Control distance, create distance, collapse it. We want to transition. So that's a good entrance into why we have those fundamental principles
Mhm.
that this technique might not work.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. It could be a technique issue. So if they say it's just not working, have them do it.
Right.
Okay. Well, you're not doing it right. That could be the answer. And that often is, depending on the level guy.
Mhm.
Often you'll get, the question will tell you whether it's a technique issue for the individual attempting it or whether it's just a problem with size, counters, blah, blah, blah. A high-level black belt will say to me, Chad, this is great. This really does work. But what if they do this? That person is telling me they understand the technique. They want to see what I'm going to say about the counter. In that case, I will either say, we're not doing the counter today. We don't have enough time. Or I'll say, you're experienced enough. Let me show you where I go from here. Boom, boom, boom. But I won't show it to the rest of the room.
Right.
Or I'll just say, hey, we're doing this today. There are legitimate counters. Stay with what we're doing.
Yeah.
That is a question that's different than, coach, this doesn't work. I
Right.
can't do this to John. Let me see what you're doing to John. Oh, well, the reason it's not working is this. Or it might be, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that to John. You just learned something today. That's valuable.
Yeah.
You learned at 5'6", you can't hug armbar a 6'8" guy.
Yeah.
Valuable. That's good. No problem. We're going to do wrist weave in a minute. We're going to do body locks. Both those are going to work.
Yeah.
That's why we train things. That's why our stuff's always connected.
Mhm.
This feeds this, this feeds this, this feeds this, and they're all similar. So
The two I have two quotes that I've used for probably the last 15 years about that. So the first one, which you've already kind of said, was not all moves work on all people all the time, right? And then the other one, you talked about transition, and I said the difference between a white belt and a black belt, this is a very generalized statement, is a black belt knows how to transition between moves, right? So a white belt will focus on getting the Americana and just focus, 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 and they don't realize that they're giving up all these other opportunities. And that's what a more experienced grappler will see when they see it's failing, and then they transition. Those transitions are super important. And most of my submissions, I would say now, I get in the transition rather than focus and like looking at that arm for that Kimura. That's how I usually am attacking now.
You're going to attack grips, position, and control. And then as they move, you're going to apply the correct finish. And
Yeah.
then if you start a finish and the bent arm locks, the counter is to straighten my arm,
Yeah.
straight arm lock, bend my arm. So as you begin to, you've established position and grips on the arm.
Yeah.
Now I begin to move the arm. You begin to submit it. I move it the other way. You submit it the other way. And now I just feed into the ultimate submission, which you didn't even have on your mind when you
Right.
started establishing grips and position.
Totally.
White belts think that you choose the Kimura you finish with. You are fighting for position, control of a limb, and then positive dominant position. And then you're starting. The white belt will say, well, some black belts have said this, and once again, it's word games, but I want to be specific and I want to evolve over time. The black belt is 3 or 4 moves ahead. If I was 3 or 4 ahead, I'd just submit you. I'm not. The difference is I can do 3 or 4 things from this spot.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the difference. The black belt gets to positions, position before submission. I say position before takedown, position before escape, position before everything. So I've modified that over the years. But the black belt gets in the position where he can do 4 things and they're all correct. And that's the problem for the white belt at that point, or the no belt or the blue belt. It's not the Kimura. It's the Kimura straight armbar wrist lock in your case. Triangle transitions.
Yeah.
He's going to get off that one little grip.
Mhm.
That's the difference. That's why also, like, I've started defending bad positions by fighting the grip.
Yeah.
So you've gotten a dominant position, you have 2-on-1 control. I strip your hand off. Now I start to escape because now you don't have option 3, 4, 5 because you have to reestablish your grip. So what I've started doing from bad spots is attacking grips and controls, then beginning my escape so that I don't feed into what's next.
Mhm.
And I make you fight to reacquire grip while I'm moving positionally. So that's something else. Whole nother podcast. We just
It
went off
always
on
is. So,
it's
Chad,
amazing.
awesome talking to you today. This was a really good one. We covered a lot of stuff, so hopefully our listeners get a lot out of it. I hope you enjoy snowy Canada and you get in some good training with those guys. And remember, we will be putting out more content, and you can check us out at nozoolines.com and our Instagram. And remember, don't follow us, lead with us. Stay safe.